This week we're going to be learning how to paint watercolor landscapes. But before we do that, we are going to learn some vocabulary and key concepts that drive the effect of three-dimensional space on a flat surface, which is sort of the point. If we're painting a landscape, we want it to feel three-dimensional, or like there's distance on our sheet of paper, even though our sheet of paper is flat. In order to do that, we need to understand something called atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective helps us create the illusion of three-dimensional space in a piece of artwork, particularly a landscape. Sometimes atmospheric perspective is called aerial perspective, and it is based on a list of concepts and the fact that as objects and the ground recede into the distance and get farther and farther away from us, the clarity and the definition of all of their surfaces starts to diminish or gets less and less. And so that that surface clarity includes things like small details. It includes things like colors. It includes things like the edges aren't as defined. And we will be working with that while we work with creating a landscape. So if we talk about atmospheric perspective, here are some of the key elements in sort of a comparison format. So close objects are larger and they have a lot of details. So if you're painting a tree or including small things like flowers, those would happen closer, not farther away. Farther away objects obviously are smaller, and it's that bigger to smaller comparison that helps us know and understand that we're looking at things that are supposed to have the appearance of getting farther away from us. Closer objects will be darker in value, so that means more paint, less water. And farther objects will be lighter in value, which means very little paint, more water, to the point that they will almost fade into the sky. Closer objects have brighter, more brilliant colors. So if we're painting a bright sunny day, it's only the grass that's closest to us that will be beautifully green. As that grass moves farther away, we experience duller, grayer, more blue colors that, remember, are also getting lighter. So the background is not as brilliantly colored. And that is part of what helps us gain that illusion of three-dimensional space on a flat sheet of paper. If we think about or imagine holding a landscape painting in our hand, another like kind of key element of atmospheric perspective or aerial perspective is that objects that are close to us will naturally be at the bottom of the image, or what we call the picture plane. And we understand that as elements in that painting move closer to the top, they are getting farther and farther away from us. So close objects are at the bottom, far objects are at the top. And we're talking here right now, this comparison chart is close objects and far objects, which we call the foreground for the close objects and the background for the far objects. And in between, we have something called the middle ground, where there's a gradual shift. Gradually, things start getting smaller. Gradually, things start getting lighter. They get duller. So it isn't just a front and a back. There is a middle that happens in a landscape as well. We're going to look at a photo example now of a landscape in the mountains. So this is a photograph, and we can identify some of those key concepts right here in the photograph. So we can see the foreground, or the close objects, are these three tall pine trees at the front that we can't see the bottom of. Notice that they are the most distinctly like kind of a golden green, and we can see branches and texture very clearly on those largest of the pine trees. As we move back in this landscape, we can see the whole tree, right? We start to see the bottoms of the trees, but we stop seeing the details of the trees, and they start to get less and less distinct that they are trees. Even though if we count like layers back on this landscape, 1, 2, 3, that third hill back, kind of halfway up, and even the fourth hill back on the right hand side, those hills are covered with pine trees, the same as the first two hills. You just stop being able to see them because they're farther away. So that's our loss of detail. The detail is gone for those elements, and they do get so small that it just starts to feel like grass, even though those are really gigantic pine trees still on those other hills. You'll also notice that as we move farther and farther back, the value changes. So I have a value scale at the top of the screen where you can see the dark, kind of this dark murky green color on the left hand side, which is identified from this front layer, and then how that color gets bluer and grayer as it moves backwards in the landscape, so that the farthest away from us range of mountains there is a very close color to the color of the sky. And that's a concept that we will practice when we start painting landscapes, is how do we make our colors both duller and lighter at the same time? Or if we're painting from the far away to the front, how do we make them brighter and more brilliant as we paint? Also notice that elements rise up in the picture plane, right? The trees that we know are closest to us are down at the bottom. The mountains that we know are farthest away are the closest to the top. And then we have this gradual shift from the foreground elements, which are the closest elements to us, to the background elements, which would all be considered the middle ground in this photograph. We are going to begin using these concepts by simply painting a sky and ground. And I'm going to show you the bad example first. We want to avoid this feeling of bright green carpet. So if we look at this image and ask ourselves what's missing from the concepts of atmospheric perspective that we just learned, we can see that there is no change in color, like there is no brighter to duller, there is no darker to lighter on that ground. That grass is the exact same color green from the front to the back. Also, if we look closely at those trees, which should be very, very far away from us, we can see some tiny like leaf details, which actually wouldn't be possible for us to see unless we were using binoculars. And those are very brilliantly colored back there as well. So we want to make sure that we're not painting landscapes that look like carpet. Even though we are going to start with very simple landscapes like this one, where we're just going to focus on creating the ground and the sky in watercolor. But we're going to focus more on making a realistic version as simply as possible to show depth and space by changing colors and elements as it gets to the back. So here is a real photograph of a landscape, and we can see that atmospheric perspective effect. Notice how the sky is darker at the top and gets lighter as it goes to the bottom. Notice that the clouds get smaller as well and closer together. They're not all the same size. They start to get so close together that even like the sky doesn't feel blue anymore. It just feels like a collection of little clouds. The grass, notice in the bottom right-hand corner, we have some like grassy detail where we can see the plants that are on the rest of this field, and they are more carefully detailed than the rest of the grass. Notice that the trees just look like lumps. We don't have a lot of details. And then that the tiny little spot of further distance gets like bluer and less actually green. Okay. So we're going to replicate that effect in watercolor by just painting what I call ground and sky as a beginning. We're going to start this tomorrow, the painting. Today I want you to take the little quiz on atmospheric perspective so that I know you understand the concepts that we're going to be using. And tomorrow we will start making our little paintings of ground and sky. One important thing to think about is that the sky in a landscape controls the color of the world, okay? And we can think about this. We can look out our window and we can see that when the sky is gray, like this example on the screen, it actually almost looks like it's raining, that the ground is a darker color. That if my sky is more brilliant, like in this first example, this is a bright sunny day, and we know that without the sun, we're never going to paint the sun in a painting. And we know that it's a bright sunny day because the sky is brilliantly blue, the grass is brilliant. This is a cloudy day or a rainy day because the sky is gray, the grass is more gray. And we can push this idea to say if my sky is a different color, my ground would also be a different color. So if I had a purple sky, for instance, that would mean that my landscape would be purple as well. And we can adjust our landscapes accordingly. So go ahead and take the quiz, and tomorrow we'll start painting.